What happened to the 12 tribes of Israel? Where are they today? The concept of the 12 tribes of Israel is the backbone of the identity of the Hebrew people, a fundamental structure that shaped their history, geography, and theology. The journey of these tribes has its starting point with patriarch Jacob, who, after a meeting with God, had his name changed to Israel, the one who fights with God. His 12 sons would become the founders of the 12 tribes, each carrying a portion of the heritage and identity of the nation. Jacob's prophecy about the future of his descendants, recorded in Genesis 49, established the tone and destiny of each lineage, marking the beginning of a saga that would transcend time. From the pages of the Old Testament to the prophecies of the end times, the destiny of these tribes is one of the greatest mysteries of the Bible. Get ready, because today we are going to dive into a historic and prophetic journey, revealing where they are, what happened to them, and what role they will still play in God's plans for the world. 12, 13, or 14, how many tribes existed? The counting of the tribes of Israel is on the surface a simple question, but going deeper into the biblical texts, it reveals a complex dynamic of divine lineages and purposes. Initially, the base of the nation of Israel are the 12 sons of Jacob, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Aser, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. However, this initial list suffers a significant change in what concerns the inheritance of the land, the portion of Joseph. One of Jacob's favorite sons was divided between his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Before his death, Jacob adopted Ephraim and Manasseh as his own children, raising them to the condition of full tribes and granting them the same inheritance rights as Jacob's other children. This action not only honored Joseph, who had been betrayed and sold by his brothers, but also ensured that his offspring would become a double portion in the nation of Israel. With the inclusion of Ephraim and Manasseh, the counting of tribes with territorial inheritance rose to 13, since Joseph would not have a tribe in his own name. The numerical dynamic becomes even more evident with the tribe of Levi. Unlike the others, the tribe of Levi was consecrated for the priestly service, dedicated exclusively to worshiping God and taking care of the tabernacle, and later the temple. For this reason, the Levites did not receive a portion of land like the other tribes. The Bible declares that the God of Israel himself is their inheritance, and that they would live on the offerings made to the Lord, and from 48 cities distributed throughout the country. Notable figures such as Moses and Aaron came from the lineage of Levi, reinforcing their special role. The biblical convention of referring to 12 tribes is, therefore, a manifestation of the political structure and share of the land, and not a rigid genealogical counting. By separating Levi for the sacred service, the organizational structure was maintained with 12 portions of land, compensating the absence of a portion of Joseph when dividing his inheritance between his 2 sons. This complex arrangement is not a contradiction, but a revelation of divine sovereignty, which maintained a symbolic pattern of perfection and completeness, the number 12, within a complex and multifaceted genealogical reality, the formation and division of the kingdom. The history of the tribes continues with the conquest of the Promised Land, led by Joshua, the successor of Moses. After entering Canaan, the land was divided by lottery between the 12 tribes, a process detailed in the books of Numbers and Joshua, according to the divine plan. The Levites did not receive their own territory, but rather cities scattered within the limits of the other tribes, reaffirming their role of service. Although Joshua's biblical account describes a partial conquest and the subsequent distribution of the land, the victory was not complete. The lack of obedience to expel all Canaanite inhabitants as ordered left seeds of idolatry and infidelity that would flourish later. The distribution of the land even in areas not fully conquered, was an act of faith in the divine promise, but the failure to complete the task foretold the future collapse of the kingdom. This tension between the idealized vision of the conquest and the historical reality of a more complex process of assimilation and coexistence, where Canaanite populations worship Yahweh, explains why future generations would fight so much with idolatry and disunity. After the age of Judges, the tribes unified under the monarchy, reaching its apogee with the kingdoms of David and Solomon. However, the seeds of the division planted by infidelity flourished fully after the death of Solomon. His policy of heavy taxes and forced labor generated great discontent, especially among the northern tribes. When his son, Hobom, ascended to the throne, he refused to alleviate the yoke, provoking the rebellion led by Jeroboam. This revolt resulted in the dramatic dissolution of the nation into two distinct kingdoms. The northern kingdom, called the Kingdom of Israel, was formed by the 10 tribes that followed Jeroboam, establishing its capital in Samaria. This kingdom was marked by political instability and mainly by generalized idolatry, including the worship of gold beads at the ends of the kingdom. The kingdom of the south, known as the Kingdom of Judah, remained loyal to the house of David and the capital Jerusalem, and was composed mainly by the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, along with the portion of the tribe of Levi, who lived in their cities. The division of the kingdom weakened the nation, making it vulnerable to foreign powers. The fate of the 12 tribes would dramatically diverge with the rise of the great empires of the Near East. The first great disaster came with the Assyrian Empire, which conquered the northern kingdom in 722 BC. Assyrian policy was brutal and effective to crush national identity and prevent rebellions. They deported the entire population, dispersing the exiled throughout their empire and resettling the uninhabited territory with other peoples. This social engineering strategy was well succeeded in erasing any trace of tribal or national cohesion. The 10 northern tribes, mixed with other populations and removed from their homeland, lost their identity and became the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The kingdom of the south, Judah, survived more than a century, but also succumbed to the Babylonian Empire in 586 BC. Although the Babylonian exile became devastating with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, Babylonian policy was different from Assyria. The population was deported in waves, but the exiled were allowed to live in cohesive communities. This social cohesion allowed them to maintain their identity and religion. A crucial factor for their survival as a people, the suffering shared in exile united the remnants of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi around the Torah and the synagogue, consolidating their identity and giving rise to the term Jew. Babylon, in turn, was conquered by the Persian Empire, led by Cyrus the Great in 539 BC. Cyrus adopted a policy of permission, freeing the Jews to return to their homeland. The return of the exile, led by Zorobabel and Esdras, focused on the reconstruction of the temple and the restoration of the law. It was in this period that the tribal affiliation for most of the exiled was abandoned, as it was impossible to re-establish the ancient tribal lands. However, the priestly roles of Levi and the Corinthians were preserved, showing a selective continuity. The survival of the southern tribes and the loss of the northern demonstrate that suffering and diaspora can both erase an identity and forge it in a more resilient way. The tribes of Israel in the New Testament and the spiritual meaning, although the political identity of most tribes has disintegrated after the exiles, the notion of the 12 tribes persisted in the New Testament with great theological and symbolic weight. The fragmented historical reality did not erase the concept that the tribes continued to exist in some way. The evangelist Luke, for example, mentions the prophetess Anna, who was from the tribe of Aser, the apostle Tiago, and his epistle addresses his letter to the 12 tribes who are in the dispersion. indicating that the tribal identity, literally or symbolically, was still relevant to the Christian Jews spread around the world. The choice of Jesus of 12 apostles symbolizes a direct and purposeful connection with the 12 tribes of Israel, representing the continuity of God's covenant with his people. The promise of Jesus that the apostles would sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel, Luke 22:28-30, shows that the relevance of these tribes extends to the heavenly kingdom and to the final fulfillment of divine promises. The book of Revelation, in particular, offers an intriguing view of the tribes in the prophetic context. In its chapter 7, a list of 144,000 people is presented, sealed of all the tribes of the children of Israel. The list contains notable differences in relation to the lists of the Old Testament. The tribe of Dan, historically associated with idolatry, and the tribe of Ephraim, one of the most prominent in the northern kingdom, are absent. In its place, the tribe of Joseph included, and Levi, who had no land inheritance, appears in the account. Many scholars interpret this passage literally, concluding that God will raise 144,000 Jews to spread the gospel at the end of times. The persistence of the concept of 12 tribes in the New Testament, despite its fragmented historical reality, indicates that its importance is more theological than political. The references to them in James and Revelation are not just historical mentions, they serve to connect the new alliance to the old one. The reconfigured list of Revelation suggests a purification and restoration of an Israel that transcends historical flaws. References show that God's plan for the people of Israel was not abandoned, but is being fulfilled in a broader and universal way, either through the church or in a future literal restoration. Where are the tribes today? The dispersion of the 10 northern tribes gave rise to the concept of the lost tribes, which became a myth and object of search throughout history. Numerous theories have emerged to explain their fate, from the most fanciful, such as those located in the Americas, to the most recent based on allegations of tribal descent. The search for these tribes, today intrinsically linked to the politics and identity of the modern state of Israel, one of the most prominent cases is that of the B'nai Mesnach group, children of Manassas, a community of about 2 million people in northeast India. And in Myanmar, they claim to be descendants of the Manassas tribe, one of the 10 lost tribes, based on their claim in animist practices, pre-Christianism, which resembled ancient Jewish customs, such as circumcision and certain rituals. The discovery and emigration of the B'nai Menashe to Israel, supported by organizations such as the Shavei Israel, are complex and multifaceted. On the one hand, for the B'nai Menashe, the claim of tribal descent is a means of accessing the law of return of Israel, which grants automatic citizenship to Jews and their descendants to the state of Israel. The acceptance of these groups is a way to reinforce their Jewish character and increase the population. However, the process is not without criticism, with accusations that emigration is linked to an ethnic cleansing policy to replace the Palestinian indigenous populations, granting them rights denied to other residents. Although the genealogical identity of most of the 10 tribes in the north has been lost to history and assimilation, the concept of tribes remains a living element in modern Judaism. The lines of Judah, Benjamin, and, in particular, Levi, the Cohens and Levites, persist. The search for the lost tribes transcended its historical basis and became a symbol of longing for belonging and a tool to justify cultural, political, and religious narratives in the current geopolitical scenario. Some passages from the Old Testament mention the tribes of Israel in prophecies of the end of times. In Ezekiel 37:15 and 28, God shows the prophet 2 pieces of wood representing the kingdom of the south, Judah, and the kingdom of the north, Ephraim, Israel, which will be united again. This points to the complete restoration of the 12 tribes under one king, the Messiah. In the last days, Isaiah 11:11-13 prophesies that the Lord will gather the rest of his people from all the lands to which they were spread, and that there will be no more envy or rivalry between Ephraim and Judah. This is seen as part of the final scenario before the Messianic kingdom. Zechariah 12:10 and 14:16-17 says that the tribes of Israel will look to him whom they have transgressed, and there will be national repentance. Ezekiel 47:13-23, God describes how the promised land will be divided among the 12 tribes of Israel. Each tribe will receive its portion, marking the physical and territorial restoration of the people of God in recent times. Then the nations will come to Jerusalem to worship the King in the final period of the divine plan. These passages seem to indicate that Jesus Christ, when he rules Jerusalem in the period known as the millennium, that is, the 1,000 years of full peace, will restore the lost tribes and fulfill the final promises to the nation of Israel. Conclusion: from history to eternity. The trajectory of the 12 tribes of Israel is a story of dispersion and perseverance that moved in the genealogical and political plane to the spiritual and symbolic domain. The fate of the tribes shows that although political identities have disintegrated under the pressure of empires like Assyria and Babylon, the concept of Israel as the chosen people remained unwavering. The exile of the northern tribes led to their assimilation and disappearance, while the Babylonian exile of the southern tribes, by contrast, served to forge a stronger identity that survived and flourished. The legacy of the 12 tribes, therefore, is not restricted to a historical milestone. In the New Testament, they became a symbol of a new alliance and of the totality of the people of God. Nowadays, the search for the lost tribes reveals the continuous tension between religious identity, nationality, and the fulfillment of the future promises of God to Israel. In the last analysis, the fate of the 12 tribes is a narrative of faith, promise, and resilience of a people that, despite the trials, remains firmly intertwined in the history of humanity and in the prophecies of his redemption.